So it's a new day. I have my coffee and I am ready to start painting Isabelle's fur. So this is the fun part. So right now, Isabelle is still primarily underpainting all of that blue and purple. So I am going in with a deep neutral, this is a brown, and covering that in areas where there's going to be shadow. So in her fur, it's gray on top, but between the sort of fluffs of gray fur, it's very dark. So I want to lay in that dark base color. That way I can go over it with the gray hairs and tufts of fur, and that shadow will already be down in there underneath. So now I move to a smaller round brush to start to get the texture of the fur. So now I have some darkness in here, a little bit of sense of light and shadow. I don't have anything too light. And I fixed the proportion of her head. It was a little squished, so I elongated the forehead area. So I'm gonna let this dry a little bit before I go back in to really define all of the highlights in the fur and the details in the face. So I'd intended to let the paint dry a bit, but after I turned off the camera, I just kept fussing with it, so I turned the camera back on, and apparently I'm not going to take a break right now. So I decided the gray of Isabelle's fur was a bit too neutral, so I've added some green into it. So I have this green-gray that's a lighter value that I'm now going back into the fur with. So I'm running into an issue here now where it's been a couple of days since I painted the fabric behind her. So where her fur is crossing on top of the fabric, it's dragging and giving a dry brush effect because this is now a little too dry. So I'm going to go back into the areas right around the edge of her back so that I have a wet on wet effect when I paint the brush hairs into the fabric. Okay, that's so much better now. When I paint the hair into the background, the wet on wet really helps blend them together in a way that doesn't look like she's like cut and paste on top of my subject. She looks like she's held into and a part of the painting. I'm now working on Isabelle's face, and I repositioned my camera because apparently when I'm working on details close up, I lean in a lot, and I was just recording the back of my head. So now I've got the camera closer up, and that should hopefully solve that issue. So now as I'm doing details, I have a very small round brush. Oops. Very small round brush at this point, and I'm using a bit more medium. The medium really helps me get control in those fine details. So I'm redoing the color in this eye because although in theory I know her eyes are the same color, and when I actually look at my image, this side of her face is more in shadow, so her eye color actually is a lot darker over here on the right. And since I have used some green in the lighter grays of her fur, I actually made a really light green for the highlight within her eyes as well. Now I am resting my hand a lot on my painting, and I'm able to do that because it has been 2 days since I worked on this area, and with the alkyd medium, it's pretty dry. If this area were wet, I would not be able to do that. So we'll see if I can get her ear hair here. The ear area is very wet, so I don't know. I think I can get it. It's not bright white because again, this is the side of her face. It's in a little more shadow. I might actually have these a little too bright right now. But if I keep kind of going into this, they will blend more with the paint underneath, and it's going to dull it out. And I just put a little bit of that color of the pillow back in there so that it's wet. It was looking a little too dry where the hairs were overlapping. Now, unless I keep messing with it, I think I have her face except for her whiskers and her wispy eyebrows, but I'm going to wait until it's quite dry to do those. I want them to be very fine and precise. So I'm not going to do those today. I'm going to let it sit a bit. So now I'm just going to refine the peach and the green fabric in front, and that is all I've got left to do here. It's now been 2 days since I finished the fabric, so I am going back in now to paint in her whiskers, which should be my final step. So I have an extremely small brush. This is smaller than a 0. This is a Blickmaster synthetic round 3/0. So very, very fine brush. And I have a slightly grayed out titanium white with my walnut alkyd medium. So the medium is going to be the key to getting these smooth lines. Now I'm going to rotate this a bit to be able to more easily do her whiskers down here. That's kind of an awkward position for my hand. So now I have the fine details of her whiskers, and I think I'm going to call this one finished. Now to remove my tape, I want to make sure that it's not going to peel off any of the paper, since this is a painting on paper. I did use a low stick painter's tape, so that should help. But I'm also going to give it just a quick blast of heat to loosen the adhesive. So I'm just going to use just a regular hair dryer. Then I'm just going to peel this slowly, and I'm peeling it away from my image so that if it does rip, it rips the edge and doesn't rip into my painting. And no tears. And here's the finished painting. Since it is on paper, there are probably 2 ways I would go about displaying this. I could mat it and frame it, but more likely what I'm going to do is trim off the little white edge on the paper and sort of float mount it in more of a shadow box type frame so there isn't any glass or anything up against the oil. So here I'm just going in closely so you can see some of those final details.